Hi, I'm Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session. And in this session, we will talk about what it takes to lead from the emerging future and how to enable collaborative innovation. My guest for today works with leaders in various contexts, runs Ubuntu Labs, and brings a huge amount of experience and expertise in the area of leadership. He is here today to share from his experience, and his name is Martin Kalungu-Banda. Martin has worked at senior levels in business, government, and international development, specializing in leadership and organization development. He is co-faculty of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values Leadership Academy, a joint program of the Presidency Institute and MIT. Martin serves as visiting faculty for the MasterCard Executive Leadership Program. For the last 3 years, he's been co-creating and co-facilitating the Rand Merchant Bank Leadership Program. Previously, Martin served as faculty for AHBC's flagship Next Generation Leadership Program, the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, the London Business School, and Oxford's Said Business School, among others. Between March 2005 and May 2008, he served as special consultant to the President of Zambia with a mandate to establish the position of Chief of Staff in the presidency. Through the Presidency Institute, Martin supported Prime Ministers Nahas Angula of Namibia to develop and implement a strategy for the transformation of the Namibian healthcare system. He worked with President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf's Chief of Staff and Cabinet Secretary, regularly travels to Rwanda to work with ministers, permanent secretaries, and heads of statutory institutions of government, and he also helped develop Tanzania's current national skills development strategy. Martin is also an author. He's the author of the bestseller, Leading Like Madiba, Leadership Lessons from Nelson Mandela. Other books he has authored are It's How We End That Matters, Leadership Lessons from an African President, and Driftology, How to Access Life's Greatest Opportunities by Flying on Wings of Others. His academic and professional qualities include organization development and coaching, public affairs, philosophy, development studies, and anthropology. And today he's here with us. So I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you, Martin. Thank you so much for being here with us in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for this opportunity to engage in conversation with you and the summit.
And so I would like to start off with, there's so many different contexts that you work in, and probably too many to touch upon in our conversation today. But the common denominator is that you work with leaders, from aspiring leaders to very, very experienced leaders. So what would you say are the major challenges of leaders you work with today?
One of the challenges I have observed leaders confront is around how to move from that inner core of who they are, what they believe in, to the system they superintend, support, or lead.
Yeah.
It is not always that leaders find that alignment. And the challenge in the first place begins with the fact that they are on a continuous journey of knowing, clarifying their inner core. And at the same time, they have the responsibility to shape, to influence, to impact the system out there.
Yeah.
That dialogue in terms of relationship between inner core and the system out there is one of the biggest challenges I find leaders confront.
Yeah.
And the second one is how to use, particularly for those who are in leadership as a result of positional authority, how not to use power in the negative. How to use power as a force for good to support, to inspire the wider, larger system.
Yeah. 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 So actually, you say there are two major challenges. One is the alignment of the inner calling and the outside and the organization or the context people lead in. And second, how to use power in a positive way rather than in a negative or destructive one.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. And so you've been working with people who are in positions of power, huge power, like presidents and ministries and other leaders in government, for example, like you've done for many of them in African countries, for example. How did you start approaching these issues and these challenges and their situations with them? So, when you started working, how did you deal with these alignment and power situations?
The beginning for me was when I was invited by the late President Mwanawasa, who was the third president of Zambia.
Mm-hmm.
By virtue of inviting me to support him, he had created the space from which I could begin to establish a relationship of trust and respect. In
Yeah.
an African context, presidents can be all powerful,
Mm-hmm.
and how you show up can either determine the quality of the relationship that you forge or end up being a relationship of subservience.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, I was well aware, because he was very clear in his briefing, that he needed someone who would come in as an equal, but
Mm-hmm.
also to help to knock on his conscience from time to time. And therefore, within the first few days of being in his space, we made an agreement on how to engage, on what respect towards the office would look like, on what challenging positions, views would look like. And having said that, then we had the rest of the time to try and live what we had committed ourselves to. So this particularly meant that from time to time, the president and I would sit over a meal, a cup of tea, or simply in a formal session, and I ask the question, Your Excellency, would you like me to give you some feedback on how we have worked together, how I've seen you engage with other people? And he
Mm-hmm.
would say yes. And then I would give as much honest feedback as I could, giving him chance to also take it in and respond. Obviously, this wasn't the easiest of things to do, as
No.
you would know. Talking truth to power
Mm-hmm.
is not an easy thing to do. But
No.
I also had to have my own practice.
Yeah.
In moments when I knew such a session, such a conversation was going to happen between myself and the president, I woke up slightly earlier than would be normal. And
Mm-hmm.
I spent a little bit of time in meditation, reflecting, allowing my inner being to develop some kind of strength or stillness, so that the possibility of communicating courageously, at the same time practicing the art of being direct, honest, and respectful at the same time, could be of service to him, to the country. And for me, I always saw him as an opportunity through which the country had given me a chance to make my little contribution. When I thought of his position like that, then that allowed me to experience a little bit of increased courage, to be honest, to be direct.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what I find so fascinating is that, thank you for sharing this example of your experience in working with the president. And so, what I hear you say is that there was an invitation from the president to show up as an equal, even though when you look at the roles, you were not, and also to like knock on his door when it comes to being like his conscience. And I hear a president who is also open to feedback, who's asking for feedback, who wants someone there to do that on one hand. And then when I look at your part of this close work relationship, is that you do something, you do your inner work as well. You align with yourself, um, so that you can access a place of stillness and access um, the courage that it obviously takes to give someone of such stature feedback on his leadership behavior. And so, thank you so much for this example. And what I'm really interested in is what got you to that place. What is it that um, elicited this request to you to hold such a supporting, coaching, feedback giving role to the president? So, what is it that you did in your leadership to get to that place?
So there are two strands in response to your question. One is the crazy, in the spur of the moment, feeling impulse that this is possible. And the second one is that I was fortunate enough to be in a place of being prepared. Let me talk about both and illustrate how that morphed into one opportunity to be invited to do the role that I have just referred to with President Mwanawasa.
Yeah, please.
So I was one of the few selected individuals while working for BP Africa, based in Cape Town, when we had been given the opportunity to learn for a year on how to do systems transformation. So under the tutelage of someone who remains my teacher to date, Lance Secretan, the 20 of us went on a learning journey, beginning from self, moving out into the wider system. How do you show up as a leader? And in those days, the focus was on servant leadership. How do you wake up every day and ask the question to the people, to the community, to the organization you serve, how may I serve you? And how do you allow truth to surface? How do you confront the challenges that would make you look away because they are too difficult to face? How do you pay attention to the edges of the system that leaders often can ignore because the center is more active, more attractive, more consuming? After 1 year of learning and practicing with Lance Secretan, and we were being prepared for the leadership of the organization, I got disappointed with myself when much of my feelings in the morning as I was finding a place for stillness to prepare myself for the day, I started getting different thoughts and feelings. It wasn't about BP. I loved the idea that I was going to grow in the organization. The organization had done everything possible to support us.
Yeah.
We were seen as emerging leaders in the organization. But then these distractions started coming through, or I thought it was a distraction. I kept wondering about the things that I had learned, if somehow could support those that were leading my country, Zambia.
Yeah.
And on a particular day, I arrived in my office. I lifted the phone and I called a friend back home. And I said, could you find me the number to the president's office? And my friend, with a little bit of shock, he said, what have you been smoking? No more human being wants such a number. But like all good friends would, after 10 minutes, he called back and he said, here's the number, but please don't be silly with that number.
Yeah.
I somehow paid attention to his last statements, shoved the number away, and continued working as I normally would. 10 minutes before 5 p.m., I looked at the number. Some madness seeped in me. I dialed the number. And the response came, hello, State House, how can we help you? I introduced myself. My name is Martin Kalungu-Banda. May I speak to the president? And the voice went, Mr. Kalungu-Banda, is the president expecting your call? I decided to be honest and I said, no, but it's important that I speak to the president. Then there came some silence, a little bit of music, and a new voice came. State House, how may we help you? I reintroduced myself. The same question was asked of me. Mr. Kalungu-Banda, is the president expecting your call? Again, I answered in the negative, but slightly emphasized my response. And I said, no, but it's crucial that I speak to the president. Silence, music again, and a new voice. How may we help you? By then, I had grown slightly impatient and I responded, my name is Martin. I've been trying to speak to the president for the last few minutes. And then the response came, Mr. Kalungu-Banda, this is the president. How can I help? I froze and forgot why I had called. When I recovered, then I introduced myself again and said, I have been learning about leadership and systems transformation. And I would like to share with you as the leader of my country what this is. And to my surprise, the president then said, Mr. Kalungu-Banda, this is Wednesday. How about Friday, 2 p.m.? I don't ever remember saying bye to him. I had put my receiver down, my hand was shaking, and walked to my director and I said, I have to fly back home. To cut the long story short, after I met the president in Zambia and we chatted, then he said to me, Martin, I'm looking for a chief of staff and I would like you to be my chief of staff. And immediately I said, no. You got to find someone of your age. You got to find someone who knew you before you became president so that the power can balance. Someone who would speak to you as they did before you became a person of position of power. Then he stopped and looked at me and said, the more you speak about this, the more I think you can help me. And that's how, a few months later, I went back home and he created a position called Special Consultant to the President so that I could help him to re-establish in the presidency the position of Chief of Staff. So that was the route to coming to work with a leader of the stature of a head of state. But I also think that he had something within himself that was longing for a relationship of equality, of honesty, of challenge to him. And I'm truly grateful all the time for the opportunity that he gave me.
I just wanted to leave a second of silence after such a beautiful and profound story and experience that you just shared with us. And my takeaway is that the president found a resonance in you when it comes to leadership and the type of leadership that he wanted to shape and wanted to be reflected on. And he found that in you as you showed up. And there's so many things that we could unpack just from this story. And I'm sure that this is not the first time that you share this story, and that it already inspired so many people. It almost makes a couple of other questions that I wanted to ask you superfluous, because there's such richness in what you did to show up, but also to go with this energy that took you, the energy that took you and made you pick up your phone and dial the number, and to go at it again and go at it again and again, not knowing what to do once you were connected in that moment with the president. And so I think that these are also the moments that we uh, need and look at and talk about experiencing more when dealing with big changes and with complexity and with uh, a calling and with the process of alignment that you also talked about earlier, um, where there's hardly any space for negative abuse of negative use of power, as you said before, but that it's a different space where some sort of future force sort of takes you and helps you to act in the moment. And so thank you again for sharing this very profound story of that. And speaking of stories, I know that you've been also collecting many leadership stories in your life. And some of them you captured in your book, Leading Like Medema. And um, I just want to know, this may be before or after your role for the president, um, but what led you to write such a book and collect these stories? What is it that fascinates you so much about uh, leadership, and specifically Nelson Mandela's?
Jennifer, it was again something not so deliberate. It was when I was teaching at the University of Zambia. I was teaching business ethics, but I was also teaching social political philosophy. And as I was reading about many Western philosophers and thinkers, I started looking for stories, pieces of evidence of African thinkers and practitioners of leadership, of analytical thinking, philosophical thinking. And along the way, then while sitting on a South African Airways flight, I picked a magazine, which is the airlines magazine, and I found a story about Nelson Mandela choosing to engage and connect with a boxer and creating such a beautiful relationship that inspired not only the boxer, but also many South Africans and people across the world who came to know the quality of this relationship.
Yeah.
And that was like fire being lit within my heart. But now I know that when something like that happens, somehow your whole body begins to pick and sense where all these little sources of knowledge and wisdom lie. Because I am not exaggerating, Jennifer, to say, since that moment, every direction I looked, some person I spoke to would give me a story about Nelson Mandela, would point me in a direction where I could find the next story and the next story.
Yeah.
So for a period of 2 years, I was picking and listening to these stories. And at one time, when I left the university to go and join BP, and on my induction, I had the privilege of going to work in the BP office in Washington, D.C. And there I met one of the grandchildren to Nelson Mandela. Her name is Nandi.
Yeah.
And I tried to milk every line of whatever story she knew about her grandfather. And I wanted to authenticate some of the stories that I had picked by myself. So when I turned back to Africa, I started compiling these stories. But I didn't have any ambition to publish anything at all. And as I got invited to speak about corporate social responsibility, ethics in business, and then I would easily remember a story that I had collected about Nelson Mandela and use it to illustrate a point of leadership. And every time the room lit up.
Yeah.
Every time you could see people's eyes popping up and say, tell us more. What else happened? And that continued again for another year.
Yeah.
Until I was teaching on an executive program in Cambridge with a friend called Peter Willis, to whom I'm eternally grateful. And I told one of the Mandela stories, and I was trying to challenge business leaders in the room that when you do not connect with people heart to heart, mind to mind connection becomes very elusive. And I illustrated by telling a story of when one of my BP colleagues was invited by the then retired President Nelson Mandela to his home to give him a briefing on the project that we had been supporting on his behalf. And my colleague said, when the driver took him to the former president's home, he did the typical corporate protocol. The driver just greets the people and retreats to the car.
Yeah.
When they went inside, Mr. Mandela and my colleague, to have breakfast, Mr. Mandela looked like he was missing someone and said, where is your colleague? And my friend responded, oh, no, sir, I just came alone. Then the former president insisted, no, outside there, I greeted 2 people. And then my colleague responded, oh, no, that was just a driver. Quietly, Mr. Mandela got out of the dining room, went and invited the driver for breakfast.
Yeah.
Peter said, that was the name of my colleague, I couldn't believe that I only saw a driver and the former president saw a fellow human being who should not be left in the car while others are having breakfast. And when I finished telling that story, Peter Willis pulled me aside and said, stop that nonsense of telling us the stories whenever you feel like. Just publish them so that we can read them by ourselves. And that was the push I needed.
Yeah.
And then the book was published.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's so interesting how you started answering my question about the book. And you said that again, it was something not so deliberate. And I find that fascinating. Also, tied to the topic of today, which is about leading from the emerging future. And Is this what you would call part of leading from the emerging future, is to be somehow invited by something, or to take not necessarily deliberate action on something that sparks in you while there's a piece of information, or there is a trigger or something that comes to you and that you then go with? Is that's where leading from the emerging future starts for you?
Thank you for that beautiful question, Jennifer. Leading from the emerging future for me, I better understand it when I sort of get back to the assumptions that I hold or one is holding.
Mm-hmm.
So I hold the assumption that we do not create our best future as individuals and as a collective. We welcome the emerging future. The assumption, therefore, I have is that nature is created in such a way that it is constantly evolving
Mm-hmm.
in a way that leads to some form of fulfillment, well-being. And our job is not so much to force to create that future.
Oh.
I have been so inspired by one of the stories told about Michelangelo when he was found, or when he was asked the question, how on earth did you know that you could create the Pieta? And his response was, it was easy. All I needed to do was to chop off everything else that wasn't the Pieta, because the Pieta already existed in the marble.
Yeah.
Our best life chances, opportunities are already there. Ours is the job to uncover them, to remove everything else out of the Pieta that is just mere rubble. And therefore, while that might sound like a lazy way of moving through life, it is not, because my job is to constantly prepare myself to receive and work with, dance with what the kindness of nature is constantly throwing my way. So my job is not that of creation, because creation is already happening outside my influence. My job is readiness to prepare my internal eye, my internal stamina, and my normal eyes and ears so that I can pick those moments when they arrive. So the big deal is not about creating. The big deal is about seeing. If I'm too busy with the hustle and bustle of day-to-day living, I will miss those moments as they come by. It's that ability, even when I don't do it as consistently as I would want, to wake up and not rush for that phone, which then loops me into all these social media and everything else, emails, and then I lose my balance. I lose my inner sight.
Yeah.
It is taking the time to look within so that I can remove the dust from my internal antenna, which blocks me from picking those moments when they are coming my way. But this can also happen at organizational and community levels.
Yeah.
That when an organization, when a community is just in a washing machine mode of just moving up and down, we miss moments when life is indicating it's time to turn. Time to move to the right. It's time to open arms. Ours is the job of preparing ourselves so that we can see, we can experience what life brings in our way. That way of being is working with the emerging future.
Yeah. Yeah. And wow, this is so profound to me. I need to take a breath before I continue talking. And so, what fascinates me so much is that the way we have been shaping leadership is so different from how you are explaining leading from the emerging future right now. And if I understand you correctly, you say it's about, it's not about creating, it's about basically being aligned. There's the alignment again. It's about being aligned so that you are open to welcoming what is already in creation and calling you to be part of that creation from the role, the person, the context that you have or that you're in, and then work with that and serve that. And it's not about the daily grind because then you don't see it.
And at the same time, yes, being aligned, but almost like a step before the alignment, there is the cultivation of attention. So that attention allows you to see what an ordinary eye is not seeing. That attention allows you to even work backward and say, you are not ready for what is emerging. Like in the example I gave you with the president of Zambia inviting me to go and support him. I was fortunate that in that space, I could see how misaligned I was for the role. And fear gripped. But when I sat down to reflect, what does this mean? And why me, who seems so unready for this? Then in that moment of attention, I remembered the many people in different parts of the world who had done similar jobs, who in some form were connected to me.
Yeah.
I remember there was someone who had worked with President Bill Clinton, and I sent a message and said, could you help? I knew someone who was already working in number 10 Downing Street and had been my boss before. And I sent a message, this has happened. Is there any way you can help? Yeah. So when we attend, then we see that nature did conspire at the same time as it was revealing the emerging future, but nature also conspired to bring help.
Yeah.
I am not attentive, Jennifer. Fear then grips in, and I don't see the help that came along, regardless of my inadequacy, for the role, for the job, for the task that I'm being invited towards.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this attention is crucial. And is that the same as presencing? Is that the same? Is that what presencing is?
When I met Otto Sharma some 15, 16 years ago, then he helped me with the language to describe that moment which you have referred to, or that experience you have referred to as presencing. It is when you create enough slowing down in yourself in order to connect with your deepest source of inspiration. That moment of slowing down, connecting to one's biggest source of inspiration, allows you to be fully present in the here and now, but at the same time the capacity to access what is on the horizon. And presencing then becomes not being oblivious to the beauty and ugliness of what is going on, but being super-sighted and attentive to that. However, not limited simply to the present. You also open yourself up to sensing what is in the offing. That act of being present in the here and now, and switching on the antenna for picking what is emerging is, in my view, what I came to understand through my work with Otto Scharmer as presencing. And at the same time, how to dance work with the emerging future.
Yeah. And as you are talking, and as you are giving such beautiful explanation and examples of what leading from the emerging future is, and how you work with it and how you embody it, is the way you're sharing this with me now and with everyone who's watching right now in the context of this summit. Is this also how you work with leaders in helping or teaching them to lead from the emerging future? Is this how you do that, through narrative, through your own experience and your own stories? Because many a leader is also very much pulled by the day-to-day grind that you referred to earlier as the washing machine that needs to keep on going. So is this how you introduce this to them, or is there also another way to work with leaders and to offer them this way of leading?
Certainly, it begins with conversation, asking questions, and which, by the way, Jennifer, you do so beautifully yourself. In the moments of engaging with you, I experience myself thinking slightly better than in other circumstances. And it is because of, allow me to say this, the quality of attention you bring to the conversations you have. This is my third one with you. And each time I have that conversation, I experience a different, deeper level of thinking. And I get almost a natural invitation to openness. In my suspicion, this is not just work on my part. This is work on the part of the interviewer, the person who is animating the conversation. So it begins with what in the Presencing Institute community, and from Otto in particular, we have referred to, because it was given to us by one of the thinkers in the community, said, the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. The condition you came with to this conversation immediately sends a particular way of inviting me. I open up. I feel safe. I feel I am in genuine dialogue. It is my way of, one, acknowledging that it's happening in the way that I am engaging with you in this moment.
Yeah.
And number two, that's the space I seek to create early on when leaders give me the opportunity to engage with them. And quite often when that happens, they will begin to see things they have glossed over. They begin to see, when I talk about the washing machine, they describe it themselves. Maybe they would use a different word such as, or term such as hamster wheel, where they are just rounding in this because that's how the system functions, and they don't know when to slow it down in order to allow it to see more, to sense more, to feel more and therefore create more opportunities for innovation and creativity, because you are seeing the connections and disconnections that you don't regularly see. Yes, I try as much as possible to engage around this, and also to enable them to see how we may have tricked ourselves all along, and much of our education system doesn't help us as well when we over-celebrate the quality of thinking that only happens above our shoulders, important as that is. When I started working in this way, I realized this, my heart, is not just a blood pumping machine. It is a faculty of thought.
Yeah.
When I look back at my own life and the life of my ancestors, they used their heart to sense what was in the offing.
Yeah.
And it's now that we are going to neuroscience and other human sciences, and particularly by the work done by our colleagues in the HeartMath Institute, that we realize we have neglected to awakening the heart as a faculty of intelligence.
Yeah.
And for me, when I have the chance to work with leaders, it is going out on a limb and asking them, could you have over-celebrated the intelligence that comes from the head and ignored the intelligence of the heart? Of course, many of these are hard-nosed business leaders. They thrive on rigor, interrogating data, reality, using the brain. But I go out on a limb by asking, might you have neglected something else? Because in your life, there are moments when you have made decisions, not because it first struck here, but it first struck there in the heart.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I couldn't possibly summarize all that. And thank you for mirroring this back also, because what I take from this is the profound impact you have as a leader when you tap into the other sources of intelligence that are available to you, as long as you are willing to align on the inside, align with your heart, and have an inner state that then creates an environment and a connection with the others you communicate with, the others you collaborate with, the others you lead, and create a space of safety and possibility, and also a space where new things then can emerge. So thank you for that. And what comes up for me is this what you do in Ubuntu Labs? Because I know that you run them. And today we're not only talking about leading from the emerging future, but also about how you use that quality then in innovation, in collaboration. So could you speak to that more? How do you use this in Ubuntu Labs?
Thank you. Again, when I look at the way we came up with the idea to create Ubuntu Lab, it was a moment created like you do create in your work, when you are engaged with others and you are asking one another questions. What's going on? What are we seeing? What are we not seeing? And in one of those conversations, colleagues of mine and I realized we could create a new form of learning on the continent of Africa. We thought, why should it be that quality education that truly awakens the person will be accessed at such great cost? when technology is allowing us to lower costs for connecting, like we are doing in this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And through the Presencing Institute, we had prototyped what it means to have 10,000, 15,000 people from across the world connected through a tool such as Zoom. And in the process of that dialogue, as if by recollecting merely, we stumbled back on the word Ubuntu. And we began to ruminate over that and share what this means. We began to ask people what this could mean. So the two things connected: our need to prototype a new form of learning on the continent of Africa, and the principle, the value of Ubuntu connected. And therefore, we thought this life force called Ubuntu, or a philosophy which says, my well-being and your well-being are intricately intertwined, so intertwined that it's stupid to try and separate your well-being from my well-being. And what we found more fascinating is that your well-being, my well-being, does not just refer to humans. Humans are included, but it also refers to humans that lived before us, humans that will live long after we have gone. It also refers to non-human beings and existence. Mm. So it was a rediscovery on my part, particularly of the notion of sustainability.
Yeah.
And then we decided, we ran the first prototype. We contacted our friends in different parts of Africa who wanted to train in this way of hosting the learning process, and we trained them for 6 months. And then we went out there to recruit participants. The first cohort was 300 participants spread across 19 African countries. And we found out that they also recognized, it was like they had forgotten what it means to be truly human, to be truly happy. It is not by simply caring for oneself. It is by caring for the other which includes nature. And in that way, then, we are just at the beginning of something we think could be really exciting. That there can be an education process that awakens the mind and the heart and the gut, even the ability to take action, even when you do not have sufficient and conclusive data. So we are running these cohorts. We finished the second. We have taken a step back to retreat, to reflect. Can we learn from the two prototypes so that in the next iteration, we can include our emerging lessons? And for me, this spells the future of my work. How can we create new learning spaces that unlock not only the intelligence of the open mind, but also unlocking the intelligence of the open heart and the open will, and connecting the African continent beyond just the ordinary of trade, beyond just the ordinary movement of people from one place to the next, but that they are connecting at the head, heart, and gut level. In that way, then, they are poised to creating new possibilities, new solutions to the challenges that confront the continent of Africa. That is what makes me passionate about Ubuntu Lab and the continent.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. And also congratulations on the two prototypes that you've been able to work with, and the creation of new learning spaces and new ways of learning for the enhancement and growth and possibilities for the continent of Africa. And what pops up for me is that while creating these learning spaces, while working with the emerging future, while bringing together people in conversation, it's an invitation and a contribution to systems change and transformation. Something that you briefly mentioned that you were learning more in the beginning of your career. And what I've come to learn is that there's always also a backlash or a darker side that pops up from the system when there is movement, growth, change, innovation that is coming in when people start working with that emerging future. So, and I'm sure that you're familiar with that. And I'm wondering, how do you deal with that? Especially also because for all those who are also watching and who are on the edge of leading from the emerging future or putting a couple of toes in the water and actually want to go in, this may be a point of hesitancy or a source of that fear when you're not completely aligned yet to pop up. So, how do you deal with system backlash when innovation emerges?
Again, for me, the beginning is the self.
Mm-hmm.
When you are working with the emerging future and you begin to be confident that this is what needs doing, it is the same moment you watch out for arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
And this was again shared with me by the many mentors that surrounded me when I went to work with the president in Zambia. They said, it will look quite often as if you are powerful. And if you lean into that, you are down the drain because you are missing the point. It's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about the office that you are serving. You will come across as if you know, because people are so willing to say yes to what you are saying, purely because you are sitting next to power. If only you can remember in those moments that it is not about you, it's about the office and the intention for which it was created. Then you will have enough space within your mind and heart to ask the questions, are we moving the right way? Even when nobody is saying yes or no to that, is this the best way to go? So those moments of you having enough space within yourself to inquire into what you are thinking is the emerging future allows you to dialogue with other people, to invite other people's views and practices so that together you enrich the perception. If the organ of perception is only you, that can lead to fundamentalism. Then you start thinking and feeling you have a direct route to truth, to the future. And your job is to shovel it down the throats of everybody around you.
Right.
Arrogance can be so imperceptible. You got to be doubly sure you are checking yourself. And by that, I mean the entire system as well.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to remind the person I was serving that even you are not excluded from arrogance, because you will succeed on 2, 5, 8 occasions out of 10, and it starts feeling like, I know this stuff. And that's the moment when everything else begins to unravel. So in my work, I try and create moments where we can question what we are perceiving, the future we think we are accessing. That means sometimes you have to dialogue with people who hold a contrary view to yourself, but with the level of openness that allows you to hear what you might not have heard before, that you are open to being given a contrary picture to what you think is the case. The antidote to arrogance is utter openness to other truths, other ways of thinking and practicing. If we ignore that under the banner of we have accessed the emerging future,
Yeah.
you can begin to ride a wave that I can only describe as fundamentalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is not the easiest of things to do, because
Mhm.
quite often, if you support a system well enough, it will score some successes. And
Yeah.
to question things in the midst of success is not something that we do easily as humans. We want to ride that wave almost endlessly. And yet we have learned enough that dancing too long on that wave is also the failure to see when you are approaching the cliff.
So what you're actually saying is, by dealing with, as I call it, backlash, it starts with yourself, and it starts with, as I'm pulling things together, it starts with being so much in the presencing with yourself that you are aware that even when you find yourself seeing and sensing and working with the emerging future, that you do not close off from other possibilities, other truths, because otherwise it becomes, what you're doing becomes dogmatic and fundamentalist. And so it's like, what pops up for me is an image of being in the emerging future and working with that while all your boundaries are still open for other possibilities. And it's like, experiencing the water and being in the water, or holding sand without holding in too tightly, so that you can experience it and work with it, and experience its quality without making it the holy grail.
And it's something at a personal level, I know I can't hold by myself.
Mm-hmm.
You hold it with certain circles of integrity, circles of quality relationships. If you do not have those circles, other circles can easily collude with you.
Yeah.
Because they are based on seeing you as a person of power, success, and everything else. But there are those circles you create because you know they will say it as they think and feel. You know they will raise the mirror towards you so that you can as clearly as possible see yourself. I, for the last 15 years, have not existed without a personal coach.
Mm-hmm.
Someone with whom I spend time, and they help to not just raise the mirror, but also to clean it so that I can more clearly see myself. And in that mirror, I don't always see beauty. There is a lot of ugliness. But because it's a mirror, then you cannot duck and find excuses. You begin, at the very least, to acknowledge that things are not as they should be.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, Martin, we've almost come to the end of our conversation. There's so many more things I would love to ask you, but we're running out of time for now. And I want to ask you two more things. And one is, as we're sitting here and talking about the emerging future and innovation and what that requires of yourself and of the context that you work in, what is emerging for you in your role in your life?
Big question. So far, I am clear that focusing on the African continent through the line of helping to transform the education system on the continent is something that life is calling me towards.
Yeah.
Connected to that, and which we have been prototyping for a number of years with colleagues, is engaging leaders across the spectrum of life on what does it mean to provide leadership that lifts the continent to its next level of evolution look like?
Yeah.
What kind of leadership does the continent need going forward? And I'm finding this fascinating when we engage young people in secondary schools and colleges and universities, but also people who are professionals in banks, in government, engaging and asking questions. You realize that many people are experiencing a dissatisfaction with the status quo, that this is not the best we can do and can be. So clearly, it is a question of creating a container space in which people begin to inquire into what next? What can we do? What can we be so that we do? Just 2 weeks ago, my wife and I were in Ethiopia, and we visited the Zambian embassy and had dialogue with the staff in the embassy. You could see that they are burning with the desire to do something different for not only Zambia, but the continent.
Yeah.
And therefore, what if we began or continued learning together on how to make those dreams and aspirations a reality? It is helping one another to listen to the emerging future and realizing what we need to do in the here and now to allow the emerging future to come to pass.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure that as you articulate what is emerging for you in the roles that you're fulfilling in your life, it resonates with many people who are watching, and it certainly resonates with me also. So thank you for sharing that. And I have one more question for you before we close off, and that is a question that I ask for everyone who is watching. There's so many things to take away from our conversation today, but if there was one thing, if there was only one thing that people take away from watching our conversation, what would that be if it were up to you?
Fantastic question again. It would be Our job is not to create that future we dream about, think about. Our job is to work on creating capacity through the open mind, open heart, and open will to see the future that is emerging for us so that we can connect with it and do the things that that future requires of us. Our business is not that of creation. Our business is that of seeing so that we can slot ourselves in the right place, take the right action to truly make the future rest here and come to pass.
Yeah. I think we could not end on a better note. Martin, we've been talking about leadership and how it emerged in you and how you got inspired by stories of others, how you got inspired by non-deliberate actions or intentions that led you to the next development or the next leadership role or the next future for you and where you could contribute in the context that you found yourself in. And with all the stories that you shared, we learned, at least I did, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, learned a lot about leading from the emerging future and how you can create innovation and land the emerging future in the now, as you so beautifully stated just now. So I very much enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me in the context of the summit today.
Jennifer, thank you so much for creating space, container, even over long distances for people to connect, for people to open up. That's my experience of engaging with you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, and you're welcome. And also to everyone who's been watching, I'm sure there is lots to talk about after watching this session. And I invite you to also see how you can be present, how you can align and connect with the emerging future that you see, and talk about it in our online community space. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.